The school campus has changed due to the pandemic. From that first day in March when schools shut down and students were sent home to now, the new school year just looks different. To any parent who set their sails to navigate these new waters, it may have seemed chaotic and choppy. The waters were uncharted, different options for your student, virtual versus hybrid versus full-time in person. How would students react to wearing a mask all day and social distancing in small classrooms? What about the protocols for students testing positive? The horizon did not appear calm when we looked out. As adults, we just wondered how our students would handle this. In this episode, we hear from students about the changes and their perspective on the decisions that had to be made. One thing we are reminded of, students are resilient.
I'm Jeff Eckert.
I'm Jason Brewer, and this is The Thought Factory.
The Thought Factory podcast is brought to you by Never the Same, cultivating students through biblical discipleship and spiritual disciplines using theology, community, and technology. Learn more at neverthesame.org.
Welcome to another episode of The Thought Factory. I am in the studio by myself, but I have my co-host Jeff Eckert with me on the line, on the phone. Say hello, Jeff.
On location today.
On location. We are not together, but we are allowing ourselves to come together for this episode via technology. So good to hear your voice, Jeff.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's good to be here, Jay. And Jason, you've been doing a great work specifically on this series, especially in really making these interviews happen and digging in and finding out some of this information. And I can't wait to hear the responses of students and youth pastors, youth workers talking about the effect that COVID has had on their campus experience. And I can't wait to dive in that. We're going to be talking about it. And then our last episode was about the election and what students had to say about that. Now, as we record this, Jason, we're in this historic moment that reminds me of what we lived through 20 years ago in 2000, where we're not exactly sure who the president is. And I don't understand how the meme that's been going around is, they can count 150 million ballots on American Idol and a commercial break, but we can't. I guess we can't count votes very well.
Right. I guess there is some severity to the count itself, but yeah, we are finding ourselves in limbo before determining who our president is. And I know media has declared, and then we have other side of just saying, just wait, we're counting votes. We got lawsuits and the court's going to decide. And yeah, back to 2000 where Bush and Gore were fighting for the presidency. It's very reminiscent of that, where we thought one thing and then we waited over a month before finding out the outcome of another thing. And so is that going to repeat itself? Are we finding ourselves in that same situation or not? We don't know. But it is interesting of the thoughts of the students on politics, even though they may not be of the voting age. They still have their thoughts on who's running this country, who's in charge, the authority that we place ourselves under because of the country that we live in. And so, yeah, check that episode out. It is fascinating. It is obviously past the election, but I think it's still worth listening to because of we are still in an election year, an election period until we decide officially who our president is.
I would just stop here and say, in our staff, we kind of have this rule of thumb in terms of politics that we don't really address things political, and public stances on our personal social media and our, ministries. But it's not that those things aren't important. We think that it's very important, and some of these things, these issues that we're discussing and sometimes vigorously in our society right now are super important. But let me just say a word to all of you ministry leaders that are listening in terms of your public stance on political issues. And I know sometimes moral issues and political issues, it gets to be a tangled web. So for example, the issue of abortion to me would not be a political issue. It's a moral issue that's been politicized. But in terms of political issues and political views, I just want to encourage you to really consider what you want your voice to count for. You know, in our world today, which is more increasingly polarized, everyone has a message, but I think as ministers and leaders in the church, we need to primarily give our voice to the gospel. And I tell people all the time, Jason, that when I look at the ministry of Jesus, we don't really see a lot that he has to say about politics. He has a lot to say about faith. He has a lot to say about everyday life. And he could have spent his entire life in ministry, talking about the unjust Roman Empire. But he left that message outside of what we see in the Gospels. What we see his life counting for was the kingdom message. Now, did that mean he didn't care about the political or the what was going on in world affairs? Of course not. I'm sure he did. In fact, I'm sure he was very engaged in that. But I think the question is, how do we really change those things? And if there's one thing I've seen in this election, it's just a reminder that we so desperately, it seems like through all of humanity, we're like the nation of Israel in the Testament. Give us our king. We want someone to lead us so that we can cast either blame upon them for maybe our life not going the way it should, or we can maybe give credit to a human instead of just following after God. It's not to say that we don't need leaders. It's not to say that we don't need elected officials, but it's kind of all in where our hope is. And so just an encouragement to you that are listening, to just really be careful. And I personally, for me, I want to use my voice for things of the kingdom and things that, aren't divisive when it comes to politics. So that's a great episode. Jason, you did a great job on it. And the next few episodes, we're going to be talking about how do you build a winning culture in your ministry. And we've got 5 specific areas that we want to discuss and dive into when it comes to 5 ways that you can build a winning culture. And we're going to get really specific. We're going to talk about things that you can do, environments that you can create. And for a long time, Jason, we've talked about leadership in a lot of church ministry circles, but I think one of the things that's missing is culture. And that's the conversation that I've been interested in for the last few years. Is you can be a great leader, but you can be in a losing culture. And so how do you build a winning culture? Because I found that not so great leaders can be in great cultures and they can really thrive. But if you're a great leader in a bad culture, won't do so well. So I can't wait for us to dive into that for the next few episodes.
And before we get into the episode today in regards to the effects that COVID had on the school campus, wanted to, point out a free resource for you called the Trend Report. It's Adolescence and the Church Trend Report that you can download for free if you go to neverthesame.org/trend report. You are able to see a lot of data in regards to the student world, and that is all based on students that are in the church that we've surveyed over the last year and their thoughts on a variety of topics. And it's all laid out in a beautiful 20-page PDF for you to download and look through and maybe use in your ministry as you are leading leaders, as you are leading students, as you are trying to figure out how you approach certain topics with your students in your ministry.
One more thing we'll mention is as we record this, on November 12th, it's a Thursday night at 7:15 p.m. Eastern, we will be broadcasting live our event called Generations. And it's an annual event that we do. We want to invite you to join us. If you're curious about our ministry, or if you're a follower of Never the Same, our organization, and you want to know kind of where we've been in 2020 and where we're going, this year has affected us in some pretty profound ways, especially financially. So this is a fundraising event, but we're going to be talking about what's happened. And I'm going to give you a sneak peek behind the scenes of what this year has been like, but then also give you a sneak peek of where we're going into the future. Some pretty exciting things. So join us for that. You can go to neverthesame.org/generations. and that's Thursday, November 12th, 7:15 p.m. Eastern time. It's 30 minutes. So join us there. We'd love to have you on that as well. All right. So we want to talk today, Jason, and we're going to hear from some students and leaders about their perspectives on the school campus. And both of us have kids in school. And it's interesting. We've had we have different experiences because our kids are different age. But Jason, you've got a pretty unique experience in your family going on right now because of COVID and how that's affected your guys' life at home.
Yeah, my wife and I, we had to make the decision when the fall was approaching of what we were going to do in regards to sending our students back to school, whether we were going to do the hybrid thing, whether we were going to do the virtual thing. What we didn't know how we were going to be affected by it. And so our original thought was going to be send them back full time. And we thought, well, hybrid, there's potential to have inconsistencies where you're in, you're out. What do we do? What's going on? So we just decided to go straight up 100% virtual. And so now my wife is home full time with my 4 kids full time. 2 of them are in school full time. I have a third son who was supposed to be in preschool, but we made the decision not to have a virtual experience for him because we just thought preschool is more social. And how do you get a preschooler to be social over the computer when, after 5 minutes he's no longer interested and he just walks away and doesn't want to watch.
Yeah, that's right.
So him and my daughter, who's our youngest, are not in school, but I have 2 older sons that are in elementary. There is this strong balance of having to have the tension between 2 kids that need attention for just living, demanding things of my wife throughout the day because they are young children. And then I have 2 other kids who are demanding because they need maybe some instruction or some motivation or need help finding certain things. And so she is constantly just navigating between these 2 students, the older students, and the 2 younger kids, because it's all in the same household. And it is a very interesting combination when you are just trying to give your best to all of your kids. And sometimes it's just not the case when you're just trying to accommodate to 4 different people who have different schedules and different needs and different demands and all this stuff. And my wife is doing a great job. One of the best that I've seen. Really, I've only seen one, but I think she's
one of the best.
She's one of the best. She has so much grace, and I learned so much from her in how she reacts to the kids in those stressful times. And yet it's really not ideal either, because you're not being able to give your best to every single student or every kid because they all have different needs. So it's wild. And I know you're on the other spectrum with older kids, 2 out of the house, and yet you still have a high school student, and yours is probably wildly different than mine.
Yeah, I mean, hearing you talk about yours, and of course being good friends and knowing your family well, there's layers to everything in terms of how the campus is affecting students and how it's affecting families and parents. So thinking about the stress level in your house as compared to mine, I've got a daughter who's a sophomore in high school, and so for her it's been a little bit of a different experience. She's had some friends that have had to go through quarantine, so she's had to go through that. And being able to go back to school and physically be on campus for the majority of this year so far, of this school year, and all the precautions. And we pretty much get almost a daily email from our school giving us an update. And I stopped in last week and talked to the principal of our public school just about how things are going and what they're facing there, and just to get an update. And And so for our daughter, it's just kind of rolling with the punches, where she's definitely impacted by things, but I pretty much ask her every day, hey, how's it going? And what she says, Jason, right? When I say, hey, how was school? And she says,
Good.
and I say, good, every day. And then I try
Good.
to go a little bit deeper. That's right. And I ask her, hey, tell me a little bit about what it was like in school, and are students doing okay, and what's it like in lunch. And so they're able to have somewhat of a little bit of a back to what it was type experience, but it's all over the place. So right now, our daughter is doing school online, and just being on Zoom literally all day, getting a few short breaks here or there. So it's a long day for these students. And what I've noticed with our daughter is that she's doing fine, but it seems like it's, I think, more tiring for her physically, and just the changes and just dealing with it. So I would say that's one effect that she's had. And so, this, Jason, everyone's all over the map. And so it's going to be interesting to hear these conversations from these students all over the country about what their experience has been like. And so before we get into that, maybe give us a couple observations as you went through these interviews. What are some things that you noticed that we should look for as we're listening?
One of the biggest things that I've noticed was I was also going in with an assumption, and I think a lot of adults also approach students with assumptions. And this is no different. That this assumption was, oh, it must be awful for you. It is probably the worst that you could possibly have experienced, or it's a negative experience for you. You probably hate wearing masks all day, or so there's some of these assumptions that as adults we tend to project, and yet these students were pretty positive. They were pretty real in regards. Not every interview made it into the episode, but the ones that made it in were finding that it, even if we were to question the the decisions that were made by the school administration and the teachers, and all that had to be shifted and changed, there was a really strong positive reaction to that, going, I got grace for them, because they're doing the best that they can. And so I thought that was pretty enlightening to me, because I would think, oh man, when change happens, it can affect the psyche of the student, and their mood changes, and it's no longer the way it used to be. And really, they're just rolling with the punches and going, yeah, this is totally fine. And it caused me to even think about the question that you had asked your daughter in regards to mask wearing, and just thinking that she would have an issue. And what was her response?
Yeah, her response was, hey, it's just what we have to do. It's just part of life. It's just an everyday thing. So, and I heard another parent say this, if you as an adult have a strong feeling about masks either way, don't really say that around your students if you know that that's the world in which they live, because it just adds their stress level. So I've just been really neutral and nonchalant and say, hey, how do how's it going? And she's just like, yeah, it's just kind of what we have to do. It's just part of the experience. And so she's okay.
Right. And so what I've found is that they are flexible, and they're resilient, and they are able to adapt to new circumstances, and they still have their opinions on maybe something that they don't really appreciate, like more homework or more screen time. But ultimately, what I thought was going to come out with these students was going to be more of a negative response, and instead it was flexibility, grace, positive, and it doesn't diminish how hard it is for them, because it is hard and they miss their friends. But I think we can also project our assumptions and our stress, or our conclusions onto students. And that, again, it just shows how sometimes that causes us to lead in a certain way.
Yeah, yeah. So I can't wait to hear these interviews and just hear from students themselves what the experience has been like through this historic time as students are dealing with COVID on campus.
Things are clearly different for students heading into the new school year. What they knew about attending school has changed to help mitigate the spread of the coronavirus. We talked to middle school and high school students from California, New York, Colorado, Kansas, Tennessee, and Michigan, answering the question, how has their school experience changed? And the response to it.
Personally, I'm someone who likes to be in person and learn like one-on-one or in a group like there. I don't like the whole virtual being at home. That was hard at the beginning of quarantine, and now we're doing the hybrid. We're in school 2 days a week and out of school the rest of the week, which is definitely better, but still I enjoy going in on school those days that I have it.
It's been quite rough, actually. We switched online in early April, went all the way through middle of May, and right now we're still doing online, but in middle October, we're switching to hybrid classes. Our district really does not have a plan, but the school aspects, I mean, school's way different than it was 7, 8 months ago, and it'll probably be different for the rest of the year. I wouldn't be surprised right now. And also it goes with we're playing sports at school. Really, the only time I'm at the building is for extracurricular activities. I showed up to cross country at 4:10, and then that's really it. The only time I get to see school these past few months. So yeah.
Well, the biggest part was that we're completely online, and they're having a school board meeting today to decide if we should go back to school for the hybrid option or if we should just stay online.
Well, my school experience has changed quite a bit. So far as when we go, we have to get our temperatures checked every morning. Which sometimes makes some people, they got to get there earlier now so they don't be late to stuff. But yeah, you got your temperature checked in the morning. It's mandated that you have to wear a mask. You have to be 6 feet apart in all the classes, so all the desks are spread out. And some of my teachers actually, it's so spread out in the rooms that some of them have to use microphones now so everybody can hear them. So that's changed a little bit.
School is just harder, like very much harder, because you don't get like the one-on-one interaction with your teachers like you used to. You don't really get to you get to know a person, but you don't get to really know a person because you don't really know what their face completely looks like. So you have like a figure of your imagination of what their face looks like. So you come up with your own person, and then you see their face and you're like, oh, that's not the person that I was thinking of. It's just harder to make connections and to learn, because I learn with connections and you can't receive those.
My school experience has changed because with my friends is we still get to see each other on Zoom and stuff like that, but we don't get to interact because the teacher is always talking, and sometimes you get to interact with the teacher, but you don't get to have one-on-one time with your friends. So it's been the social part that has affected me more in this change of school.
My school life has changed during COVID-19, especially as a high schooler. It's changed drastically, where every night or every Friday night I was going to a football game, or every night I was hanging out with friends, and now I'm stuck at home on a Zoom call because we're all online out here, and I don't even know more than half the people in my class, and there's no social interaction, which isn't fun. So school has almost turned into a routine that we do at home where we wake up, we get on a meeting, and then we go and do classwork and homework. And that's pretty much it. There's not a lot of bonding happening in school, and there's not like a lot of social interaction either.
So when school first started back last semester, it was moved online for the rest of the year. And at first that was really nice to get to sleep in or do school in my pajamas. But then it did kind of get hard because you can't collaborate with your like other students. You can't be as interactive with people, and that's really important in learning. So that part was really hard. And then moving into this year, we had a portion of online school and then parts where we would go in person and other parts of the week would be at home. That was really helpful to get back in the groove of things. And now we're actually fully in person, and that has been really good. We do have to wear a mask, which is sometimes a hassle, but it's been such a good experience. And I've been really trying to be really intentional about how I am at school now because I could not be going the next week in person. So
To broaden the student view, we also asked youth pastors around the country from the same states as the students you just heard from about what they are seeing in their areas in regards to the school experience for the students they lead.
Yeah, so students' response to what's happening is kind of all over the map. I have most of my students at the end of the day, I have a definite percentage of kids who are fearful. Like they're fearful to come back to school. They're fearful to go back in person to church or to youth ministry. There's definitely a small percentage. It's not a big percentage, but a small percentage who are fear-based, whether it be parents or students. And when I say fear, like really like fearful, like have thought about like if them potentially dying if they get this or pass it on to a family member. And so not like this, not these crazy like fear over faith, but like people who genuinely, probably to a level of anxiety or unhealth, have an unhealthy view of the virus. That we would have that percentage. I would say most of my students, I feel like, are kind of in this middle category of like, life is what it is right now. I'm kind of just living and seeing what happens. We don't like what's happening around us. Emotionally, they're kind of all over the map. They have good days, bad days. Some are just sick of being online, and really for most of our students, like they truly, I think the thing that they miss the most, that they keep talking about how it's affected them, is like the in-person gathering or actually being with their friends.
So right now, it seems like even some of the schools that started out virtual, a lot of them have now moved to doing more in person, or they moved a little bit sooner than they anticipated. So it seems like for a lot of our students, now we pull from quite a few different middle schools and high schools. So, but it seems like the majority of our students are meeting in person. Those that are meeting virtual, I know that they're missing a lot of their connections. But man, I just feel so much for the teachers and administrators right now. You get the sense from, like, we have some teachers that volunteer with us, and I can just feel their exhaustion when they walk into the space that we're in. And so I know that they're trying their hardest to make that experience as normal for our students as possible. Honestly, I've been impressed with the students and their resiliency and willingness to adapt to the situation that we are finding ourselves in. I've just been really impressed by, their resiliency and willingness to try new things.
Kids that are hybrid, they're grateful for that time to get in person and do that. For some of it, it's just they're definitely still missing that. And then those that are fully online, they're definitely starved for connection. Students are they are resilient. I think we've got kids that are doing the best they can in it.
The way I see it, I think most students, they're ready to be back in school. They want to be back in school. And I joke around with them, and I always say, would you guys ever think that there would be a day that you would be saying, oh, I'm ready to be sitting back in class, And they kind of laugh about that. But it seems like, 80 to 90% of the students, that's where they're at. And I'm not saying that that's my opinion, that that's where they need to be. I think a lot of this has to do on deal with the community that they're in, and how things are, going with COVID within that community. But most within our community are ready to be back in class. A lot of parents are ready for those students to be back in class, and I think that they really are longing for person-to-person like connections.
So, would students change anything with how their school handled things? No, not really. For the most part, students were positive and understanding about the hard decisions that needed to be made and the changes that had occurred in their schools.
I think our school did the best that they could and just kind of followed the rules. And I don't know if I would change anything just because, I mean, they probably know more specific things than I do. And just, I think they did the best that they could do with the different procedures and whatnot.
I think our school handled it the best they could. I mean, with limited information and everything, bad things started to happen really quick. I think our school made the right decision to just, keep kids out of the building as much as possible. Now, there was about a 3-week stint where we didn't have classes. That's just because we didn't really, none of the teachers had a lesson plan for online school, and a lot of us understood that. But outside of that, our school district did a great job to ensure people's safety, and for a while our numbers were pretty low because of that decision. So yeah.
I feel like my school is actually handling things like very well. I don't think there's anything much that they could have done differently to make things better. Like, we're spaced out. We wear masks all day. You don't come in close contact with anyone, really. You eat at your own table. Everything's kind of like to the best that we can do.
I feel like their response was pretty well, because it's kind of hard to see this stuff coming. So, I mean, their response, I would say, was pretty head on. They canceled it when they needed to, and it was mandated to, and they did their best to get everybody back in the swing of things with all the mandates that they had to put out. So I think their response is pretty well oriented in the fact that they did everything they could.
I was actually really impressed about how my school handled things. They really took into consideration everything going on and tried to make it as functional as possible. They made sure that we could have some sort of interaction online with our teachers, and teachers were really good about that, making sure that we knew they were there for anything that we needed. And then it was really nice to be able to go back in person this semester, and I think they transitioned into that well. So I don't really think I would change anything about that.
I am reminded of how sometimes our perception of a situation is different than what a student may see or interpret. As a parent, I had seen some of the logistical hurdles for my own children, or worried about how my preschooler would handle being taught by a faceless teacher who had to keep their distance. I questioned the consistency or the possibility of my own child getting COVID and being labeled as the kid who everyone has to keep their distance for the remainder of their life. Yeah, maybe there is some hyperbole in that statement, but parents had to make decisions about school with many questions swirling in their head, and students appear to just roll with the punches. Adults have so many more years of life experiences to allow different perspectives. And I'm not saying students are naive or ignorant, but sometimes our assumptions are wrong, and it can bleed into how we lead students or how we make decisions for our students. We can be quick to come to conclusions, but James 1:19 keeps coming to my mind. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. In that quickness, are we failing to listen? Are we failing to be gracious no matter the decisions or the outcomes, even amongst the chaos?
The Thought Factory podcast is brought to you by Never the Same, whose vision is to see new generations transformed in Christ to further the kingdom of God. Learn more at neverthesame.org.